Okay, so I think more people deal with imposter syndrome than we realize. Is validating to have like the definition of it, a term for it. But what it really is this sense of disconnecting and feeling like you don't know enough, you don't belong, or can't compare to others. And I think it's important to realize what it actually is because it's probably showing up for a lot of us, but we don't even really know. And the part that stands out to me and the part that encourages me to keep doing this unlearning work is how imposter syndrome eats at us personally and to the point that we start to believe it and it impacts our actions. Every time we entertain that lie, it disrupts our possibility. And there are folks that want to keep us in this state of disruption, right? So you can never see, believe, or access your power. And that's what this is about. It's about understanding who we are and how capable we are, and really getting us to like reclaim that power again and get back into that space. So, in case you don't know, my name is Amanda Flood, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I'm also a mindset coach for Black and Brown women in business. And I love to help women just confidently show up and dominate the spaces that they're in. Because within that, there's little space for imposter syndrome, even though it does show up at every level, right? And that's why it's just so important to keep working on yourself. And that's why conversations like these are super important because we get to keep it top of mind. And I wanted to have this conversation to start really redefining our relationship with imposter syndrome. And I'm doing something I don't typically do, and that's interviewing a dude. Right? I've done it in like group conversations and stuff, but typically one on one, I don't. But it's because I'm here for my ladies, but I wanted to switch it up, right? And I think sometimes it's about bringing perspective into your space. So I'm excited to bring up today Mr. Michael Ayala-White. Yes, what's up?
Hello, how you doing?
So
Yeah.
good to have you. Michael is a trauma-informed certified coach and inner child recovery specialist, which is pretty dope. So welcome to the party, Michael.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course. So, Michael, what I love about you, besides that you're just enough Puerto Rican melanin to jump on this melanated coalition, is your story and your story around imposter syndrome and how, from an early age, you really believed that you had to be someone else other than yourself to be accepted or to be valuable. So it's just so interesting, just that like early awareness, because we don't always realize how early this dynamic like kicks off for us,
Mhm.
right? So I would love if you can share a little bit about that. Like, can you share that moment or the experience when you realized that imposter syndrome was affecting your life or your career? And what was a turning point for you?
Yeah, just to reaffirm quickly what you said, I mean, the kids are so smart, and while intellectually we don't have like brain capacity for like rationale, emotionally so
Yeah.
intelligent, and we start to spin these narratives of like, okay, something must be wrong with me
Oh,
if these external things are happening. Even though that's not true, that becomes our
hmm.
reality, and the roots of
Yes.
imposter syndrome are very, very early on normally. So for me, when I started to engage my own story in my late 20s, I started to realize that most of my life, I actually believed that life would be easier if I was Caucasian.
Speak a word. Talk to me, honey. Mm.
And I didn't realize how that affected the way I acted. I didn't realize that how that affected the way I saw the world, how I moved in different circles of being half Puerto Rican, half Irish. My mom is white and my dad's from Puerto Rico. And so as I started to engage my own story, I was like, I have been playing a role that I thought that if I could just act this way or act more white, then I
Mm.
would be accepted because of the culture that I grew up in, which was predominantly Caucasian. What I
Mm.
didn't realize is that I had cut off an entire culture that is part of me
Who
that
you
I had
are.
no
Yeah.
idea to engage both in and around. And I thought that, hey, if I just blend in and
Mm.
kind of maneuver in a way where the people who I was around, which was predominantly Caucasian, would accept me, then that would mean that there wasn't anything wrong with me. Because from a
Mm.
young age, fundamentally, I believed because of toxic shame and racism that I experienced that there was something wrong with me because of the way I looked.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of folks can relate to that. And I think as folks are listening, if you do let us know where even coming down to, and I think inherently for melanated folks, like this is the issue, right? Where we, for whatever reason, have come to believe that because of the color of our skin, like we are less than, or like this color, there's more value there. And that's what I need to be, and that's what I need to strive to.
Hmm. And the interesting thing for me is that, especially in the summer, like I get
Mhm.
a lot darker. You
Yeah.
understand, living in the East Coast, when the sun goes away, like for me, my melanin starts to, I have to tap into the reserve tanks, and I'm like, okay, like where's the sun? I need the sun. And so for me, it was interesting because I grew up in a space where I didn't look like the people. And so I didn't feel like I belonged there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got older and moved closer and into the city to
Mm-hmm.
people that looked like me. And then I very quickly found out my culture actually doesn't match their culture either, because they're predominantly Latino in terms of their culture, their food, their language is Spanish, and it's island Spanish. I don't speak island Spanish. And
So there was
so,
still like that disconnect there.
mhm, yep. And so it's the
Mhm.
concept called dislocation, where
Mhm.
like I felt like a person without a people for
Mm,
most of my life, where I'm
mhm.
like, okay, so I leave this space that was very traumatic for me in many ways and go into this place where I feel like I'm going to belong because I look like them.
Right. What should be home. Yeah.
Exactly. And very quickly, I found out our experiences are not the same. Our upbringings are not the same. Our language, in many ways, is not the same. And so
Mm,
now my hopes and dreams in that aspect are now brought into question. And so now I'm kind of in this space where I'm like, I can move anywhere, but I also don't belong anywhere.
mhm. It's
And
powerful.
so
Yeah.
it was an interesting, and still is in some ways, an interesting journey where the redemptive side of that is the ability to build bridges in ways that most people
Mhm.
can't. And so I can actually network and bring people together as a bridge that most people cannot. You're
Mhm.
typically anchored in one side and you don't know the other side.
The experience of the other. So there's been some unexpected gains for you then in dealing with this sense of imposter, which has been really tied to like culture, just as inwardly as well as like outwardly, like what I look like in acceptance, all these complex dynamics, honey.
Mhm.
Um, but there's been some gains. Can you tell me about those gains or how it sort of shaped your journey? And I think we're starting to hear it where you've really used it to your advantage to bring people together.
Mhm. Yep. So Buffalo, I think now we're going in the right direction. I think now we're the eighth most segregated city per capita in the United States. Still top
Mhm.
10. And it's
Oh,
very potent if
yeah.
you are from here, where like I can take you on a drive to the specific cross streets where each section of the city changes.
Wow.
So what I've been able to do in part of my work throughout my 20s now into my 30s has been to kind of cross those geographical and cultural lines, build relationships with people and bring people together to figure out how is it that we can move in the right direction in terms of crossing healthy cultural lines,
Mm,
honoring the culture that we come from, but also seeing that, hey, the beauty is in the diversity. And how do we
yeah.
step into someone else's culture and take our shoes off and be gentle and understand we don't know what we don't know, but also see the beauty in that? Because as I'm sure you're aware, we fear what we don't know. And
Yes.
when we're afraid, we don't take steps of courage. And I see in the
Mhm.
top right corner, courage over fear.
Mhm.
Courage is not feeling fear.
Mm.
Courage is feeling fear and choosing to take a step of action in the direction of what could be beauty, what could be relationship, what could be growth.
Right.
So,
What is that possibility for you? Right. And there's so many parts to that, right? And oh my God, we won't be able to get into all of it today. But when you think about, oh, because the things we fear, right? And I think to me, this is the problem with imposter syndrome. It's because people fear us that they create this narrative and they create these little barriers that they're not always even aware of that they create. But it keeps us down,
mhm,
right? And here's the other side. And this is why I hate that statement like, we're all created equal, like, go for it. Like, we are, but we're not.
mhm,
Because on the other side, I, I can't have that experience of you, right? And I want this thing. And these are the things that I struggle with. And I don't think on the other side we see the struggle. and we fully understand what's happening, that people can't show up as themselves, or when you see them, you don't see that internal struggle of like this person trying to fit in for all these different reasons, and this person responding to the little like micro narrative that you have of what you don't want me to be because you're afraid of me too. I think that's what creates this imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
right? Because
Yeah.
we're really not the imposter. It's this dynamic that's happening.
hmm And that dynamic is so multifaceted because if you think about, just to use a quick analogy, if you think about if you've ever seen
Mhm.
someone make cookies from scratch, where
Mm.
they create the cookie dough and they roll it out, and there's a square, this rectangle that is the cookie dough. And that is our beauty when we come into this world. And the different molds, whether it be family molds, society molds, friendship molds, in terms of kids who don't understand why I look different than them, they
Mm.
get pressed onto us. And so then we lose these young age, we exile them because we think they're not accepted. And we spend our
Mm.
entire life into our adulthood, if we're not careful, longing
Mhm.
for a part of ourselves that we've buried. And this is where addiction, other things come in to help regulate the reality that I'm actually not fully myself and I don't know how to
Mm.
operate in this world and there's trauma. And so I need to either numb and suppress or accelerate above whatever's happened to me. And
Yeah.
really, recovery, therapy, all of that is the recovery of self for me. It's been
Yeah.
the recovery of the pieces that actually hold the most beauty. But because of
Mhm.
imposter syndrome, I changed the B word to brokenness, where I thought this is
Mhm.
broken. I can't
Yeah.
have that. I can't be that. When in fact, those pieces hold the most beauty for who I am as my core self.
Yeah. It's a disconnection from the core self that like creates this uncomfortable space that sometimes when we don't even understand it, then we're looking at some really unhealthy ways to deal with it. And whether it's, what might seem like the extreme, like addiction or,
Mhm.
whatever your vice might be, it it doesn't always have to be at that level, right? That it can show up in how we don't show up, the things that we don't do, when we don't speak up. Like those become our vice of protection too, right? We're
Mhm.
afraid to say, we're afraid to let people know who we are. All of those things, I think it still falls in the same bucket of trying to deal with this discomfort and disconnection. I would love to hear from you, even if it's just one suggestion of how do we deal with this, right? What is one piece of advice that you would give to folks struggling with imposter syndrome? And I'm curious if it's different for women versus men.
Mm. Yeah. So, excellent question. A lot of things. I think the main thing I would say is that from my experience, the answers to imposter syndrome were found in my own story.
Mm,
For me, I realized how not only how disconnected I was from myself, but how I was from my story, and I wasn't curious about myself because of my shame, because of
mm,
the toxic shame that kept like you're like something's wrong with you, so we
yeah.
don't explore. We don't explore the fact that we create these narratives. So I did so young, and it's like, well, if they were learned, they can be unlearned, as you talked about in the opening. So
Mhm,
for me, the remedy for recovery of self was found within my own story. But
mm,
the pain is what deterred me. I didn't realize that until I started to engage actual story work and therapy and trauma therapy for myself.
mm, mhm,
Of course, I didn't want to do this. This is super painful. But the reality is that what I've gained more than anything else, emotional intelligence, ability to have healthy relationships, self
mm,
awareness, all of that, beyond any of that, the thing that I actually gained was myself, my
yeah.
true self. I became reconnected with myself. But that, for me, that only happened when I actually engaged the pain points in my story that created imposter syndrome in the first place.
Mm, mhm. Yeah, so the answers are really it's within us, but it can be hard, uncomfortable work reconnecting to that space.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Mhm.
yeah. And I almost want to say like of no fault of your own, right? But there's
Yeah.
definitely beauty in doing that work.
Yeah. And it's not a secret that most people don't want to engage therapy. And part of that is because the narratives that they have created, including myself, leave no room for self compassion.
Mm,
Because self compassion and high levels of toxic shame don't coexist.
Mhm.
Toxic shame drowns out the ability to have self-compassion. But when the toxic shame comes down, well, now not only can you have self-compassion for yourself, but this is where we can start to cross bridges and borders and engage other people's stories that we don't understand because we've done our own work. And
Right.
now we have more empathy because we know what we've gone through. And now we're curious. Well, what if the other person either went through something similar or very different, but it shaped their worldview in a similar way? Now I'm
Mhm.
curious about that. And instead of stepping back in fear, I lean in curiosity because
Mm.
I myself have done that for my own story.
Yeah, I mean, even in this conversation, I think there's so many points that we can relate to, even if there's parts of us that's different, right? But gender, culture, race, all of those things. But there's still parts that we can absolutely relate to.
Yeah. And the ultimate disarmor, at least in my experience of doing this work up here, is food. Food is such a beautiful bridge where it's like if you're open to eating good food, even if it's new, and we have so many cultures in Buffalo, as downstate's the same.
Hmm.
Food is such a beautiful disarmor, and it's a very intimate thing where it's like if someone invites you into their space and you're eating their food, well, now they want to get to know you and they
Yeah,
want to be seen as well by you.
yeah. I like the idea of the intimate connection. I think I work a lot from that space where there's really a lot of healing that can happen in intimate connection, whether it's like intimate discussion with each other, whether it is like we're partaking in food, because that's often the language of
Mhm,
our culture, right? So,
mhm.
that makes a lot of sense. And I guess it's positioning yourself to be open to that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, as I think of this concept of redefining imposter syndrome, like how does that filter through you and what does that mean for you?
Yeah, imposter syndrome. um, Imposter syndrome obviously is my best attempt at being accepted, loved, seen, things like that. Now, imposter syndrome is like a familiar mask that I have to be careful I don't put on sometimes, where it's like, okay, I've really taken this off. Like, there's a part of me that I would call Mr. Performer because my gifts are more external. Like, I taught in different levels and have spoken in front of thousands of people, and that's all great.
Mhm.
But I was so emotionally sick at the time that I just was putting on a show. And
Mm,
so for me now, it's like there are markers where I'm like, okay, if I feel like I have to perform here, I know that something is off either internally or externally in the environment that is causing
it's
this
activating that.
response to
Yeah.
go, okay, my guard's up, my nervous system's kicking on and sensing some sort of disruption or threat or something.
Mhm.
So now I have to figure out, is that just me? Or is that the environment? Or is it both? Or is it neither? Like,
Mhm.
what's going on? And so there's
Mhm.
markers for me now where I'm like, I have a pretty decent awareness of like, okay, I feel like I have to perform here. Let's do a quick evaluation of why I feel that way. Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's a trauma response. Something's reminding me of that. And I look at the situation, I'm like, no, this actually isn't that. Or yes, it is. We need to pay attention to that.
Mhm.
It could be either.
Mhm. Yeah, and you're like describing like a couple of skills mixed in there, right? So if you could clearly share for some folks some skills that they can use to kind of navigate this space, because I hear the awareness, right? And
Mhm.
it's shifting from this place of there's something wrong with me to wait, there's something happening either within me or within my environment that's activating this idea that there's something wrong with me, right? But
Yes.
maybe there's nothing wrong with me. I just gotta find these parts of me and love on these parts again. But how do we even get to that and navigate that?
Mhm. Yeah. So, couple things. One, like, uh, just by your title, I'm sure you're familiar with somatic work, like body work.
Mhm, mhm.
So, especially as a guy, um, in growing up in my culture,
Yeah.
the ability to be connected with my body was just anything but familiar. Like, and
Mm,
I'm not going to speak for women in any way. I'm just speaking from my experience as a man. Like, that was not on my radar ever,
mhm,
not even in the framework of how I grew up. But it's been one of the most important things for me is to get reconnected with my body and understand that my body's not an adversary, it's an ally. And even the threat responses that I feel, those are just signals trying to tell me something that are happening.
None. Yeah.
And, and so like the first thing is to go, okay, if my body's not an adversary and it's an ally, that means I need to listen to it. Instead of fearing my anxiety, although that can, if you go full blown sympathetic, like that can be overwhelming. And
Mm-hmm.
plenty of times it still is for me.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have enough awareness to pause and go, okay, first question is, what's going on?
Right.
That's not even the why. The why is important, but the what I would say is more important for me, which is, okay, we need to figure out what's going on first. Because
Mm-hmm.
kind of full blown anxiety mode that you can't figure out the why, and then you're just spinning. So it's like, okay, what is it? Well, I'm sweating, I'm nervous, my body feels warm, like just
Right.
indicating.
The racing.
Yep, like dry mouth, which is a threat
Mm-hmm.
response of
Mm-hmm.
preserving water. Like all of these things are responses. So pay attention to your body. What's going on? I feel this way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What is the reason behind this? And just be curious. And this can all happen, like for me, in like a minute and a half. It's not like this.
Yeah. It's a quick thing.
Yeah, it's not like a dissertation. It's just
Right.
of like, okay. And so scanning the room, okay, I feel this way. Is there anything in here that is making me feel threatened? Yes, this thing reminds me of that. Okay, now we know. Now we can be aware of that
Right.
and go about what we're doing. No, there's not. Okay. Listening to my body. All right. If there's nothing, no like conscious threat,
No threat. Yeah.
like what is it that is activating me? And that can take a little bit more practice of like, okay, what is it? Is there some thought that's come up?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
again, this is holding space for yourself in a way that
Right.
imposter doesn't allow you to do because it's just something's wrong with me. So we don't
Right. We're so wrapped up there that we can't come back to just noticing, right? Like what is it? What could it be that's setting me up there? And even if we're not quite ready to like dismantle that, at least checking into like how true is it, right? Because you're
Yeah.
talking about it in a sense of this like threat response. And I love that view because I think it helps all of us to understand that if this has been happening for you, it's almost okay because this is how you've protected yourself, right? 'Cause
Yes.
when there's a threat, your body shows up to protect you. It doesn't want you to get in trouble. It doesn't want you
Mhm.
to get hurt. So it's doing the right things, but it could be doing it for the wrong reasons. So that's where we get to shift to now to let our mind know that, okay, we're okay. So awareness sounds like a powerful place to start tuning into what is it and how true is this and maybe I'm safer than I think, safe enough to be myself.
Yes, that's right. Awareness is huge because awareness can lead to action, and
Yeah,
you can't have action without awareness.
that's
And
it.
the ability to be curious about yourself and go, okay, what is going on, and what is it that I need right now? Because you're right. Like this again, it goes back to self compassion of like
Mm,
if you're
I
not
need that
compassionate
too.
with yourself to go like when I was young, typically when I was
Mhm.
younger, I had these experiences that hijacked my threat response, and whether I remember them or not, my
Yeah,
body knows. Like the
absolutely.
classic book, right? The Body Keeps the
Like
Score
the
by Beth
score,
Mendenhall.
yeah. Hmm.
The OG, like who's like your body remembers it all. You may not remember it, but your body knows. So if
Hmm.
you can view your body as an ally in that way, have compassion on yourself instead of just going like, I shouldn't feel this way, which is a classic
Right,
thing, right?
right.
And that's
Right, and
wrapped up.
bringing back the shame, really,
Yeah,
right? Because if we're in
yeah,
that shame space, it brings back the shame again of like something is wrong with you for doing that, or for
that's
responding
right.
that way, or for acting that way, or for not doing the thing. We're
Mhm.
keeping that story going where like you don't deserve that weight anymore. And at a minimum, if it's not helping you get to where you need to go, and if you're not in that space of deserving or not, if it's not helping me get to the action that I want, then it doesn't belong on your table.
No, no, it's not serving you positively. And I would argue that toxic shame, there's rare, I will speak for myself. I've not found a circumstance where toxic shame has served me positively.
I don't really think so.
Yeah, it's one of the strongest experiences in the human experience for sure, but
Yeah.
there's not really any positivity in it. And the acronym that I was taught for shame um, is should have already mastered everything.
Mm.
And so,
Pressure. That's pressure. I just hear pressure in that. Aha.
mhm. And so when I get a bad case of the shoulds, it is a clear marker for me of like, oh, shame's here. I may not know totally where, but my language is telling me that shame is here and I'm experiencing it. And I
Yeah.
need to be cognizant of that because that's so important. Because again, shame drowns out self compassion. So,
Yes. Yes. And it almost paralyzes your ability for action, the kind that's going to be productive for you and more meaningful for you. So,
mhm.
yes, I love all of this. This is so dope. And wow, like I want to just say that I'm really grateful for your time and I think everything that you put on the table here. I know that you have so much more to give, honey. I do respect your time. But if folks do want to continue gaining from you and learning from you, because I think we do have to expose ourselves to information, because that's also how we get to awareness. Because a lot of times we simply just don't know. And that's the other
Yes.
reason why we've got to be compassionate, right? Like we don't know if it's wrong, if we've been living it as a right. So when you get the information, that's when things start to just click and open up, even if it's scary. It's like, oh my goodness, like this is what I thought. Like, wow, I could do this way. Oh my God. So where can folks follow you or learn more from you? How do we get to you?
Yeah. So go to my website, coaching.com. All my information's on there. And I chose Wayward because I was a wayward soul through imposter syndrome and trying to figure out like how do I get
Where I need to be.
home, you
Mm,
know, whatever that actually means, and that
yeah.
home is still something that and I'm defining as I go of like this is home to me.
Yes.
So yeah, go to my website. All like the social media links for both Wayward and my personal accounts are there, and I post on both often with regards to information. And I'm trying to help guys grow into who they believe they're supposed to be outside of
Mhm.
imposter syndrome.
I love that. I love that. And again, even though there may be some differences, I think there's similarities too, right? For men and women. And I think from the women perspective, I think it's also interesting to hear that like men deal with this too, right? And how we do have this sort of shared experience and trying to find ourselves,
Yeah.
especially when we introduce that melanin, honey, and how we're trying to like find our power and who we are and our authenticity and believing in our story again, all of that. But we can resolve and heal all of that. We're gonna do some magical things in this world.
Yep, that's right. If you can, the the work is in the rediscovery of who we are and the
Yeah.
recovery really of who we were meant to be before all of the nonsense, all
Mm,
of the experiences that while they're negative, they still help to shape you and give you in some ways healthy views of the world and then some ways unhealthy views of the world where it's like, okay, not everybody is awful. There are really bad people, but can we own who we are? Because someone needs what we have.
yes. Yes. I always say that. Like, what's the cost of you not showing up? Right. And we are, we're grown folk now. So,
Mhm.
we didn't have a lot of choice when we were younger, but now as adults, we get to make really good decisions for ourselves. So we hope that you guys will keep making great decisions for you. Definitely go follow Michael. You can find me at Amanda.Flood or Amanda Flood on most platforms or Courage Over Fear on YouTube. And to the women tackling this, like we'll see y'all soon. I will connect with you, connect with me, and for y'all fellas out there, listen, now y'all got Michael, so there's no excuses. We're gonna find our stories, and find our way to connect to our best selves. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.